Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. Today I bring you Jessica Lahey. Ever since I finished my career as a Division I All-American athlete, I longed for not only the clarity of purpose that I had as an athlete, but also the accountability that comes with aspiring for big goals with a team of like-minded people. Then I discovered mastermind groups. Masterminds are small groups of like-minded people who get together either in person or over Skype or just over the phone to provide support, feedback, and advice to other members of the group. So I dove in and I learned all I could about mastermind groups, and then I finally launched my own. And the change was instant. I regained the accountability of being part of a group of like-minded, hardworking individuals who hold me to a higher standard. My mastermind group helps me get feedback and advice and even validation when I'm making big decisions in my life. And I have clarity and focus and accountability again, just like when I was an athlete. I've now facilitated dozens of high performers in mastermind groups. I'm talking Olympians and MBAs and neurosurgeons and professional athletes and entrepreneurs and lots of others. I've taken everything you need to know to start your own mastermind group, and I've put it into a short 10-page ebook titled The Quick and Easy Guide to Starting Your Own Mastermind Group in 30 Days or Less. Grab a copy of this free ebook by going to jimharshawjr.com/mastermind. That's jimharshawjr.com/mastermind. Jessica is an educator, writer, and speaker, and she is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, The Gift of Failure, How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go so Their Children Can Succeed. Reading from her website about the book, it says, quote, "In the tradition of Paul Tough's book, How Children Succeed, and Wendy Mogul's The Blessing of a Skinned Knee, this groundbreaking manifesto focuses on the critical school years when parents must learn to allow their children to experience the disappointment and frustration that occurs from life's inevitable problems so that they can grow up to be successful, resilient, and self-reliant adults." So, end quote. So that's like, precisely what, my TEDx talk was about. And this really hits on what we as parents and teachers and coaches and even managers, really want to have in the people that we work with and in the youth of today. So if you don't have time, as usual, to listen to the entire episode, make sure you grab the action plan from this episode. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. You'll have a PDF action plan with all the best stuff from Jessica in this episode. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And I always thank my guests because I know how busy people are. You actually post your schedule on your website. Jessica, you are all over the place.
Yeah,
traveling,
I travel a lot.
Speaking. This message must really be resonating. Is that right?
I'm just so grateful. I knew when I sold the book that this was going to be a difficult book for a headmaster, a principal, or a teacher to give to one parent. But it turns out it works really well as a community read. So schools all over the country are sort of, having the whole community, the whole school community, all the faculty read, and then all, recommending it to parents. And then I come in at the end and do a little professional development, a little talking to students, and then talk to the community in the evening. And it keeps me really, really busy. But it's fantastic because I get to come at it from all angles. I get to get everyone sort of working from the same vocabulary and research perspective. So it's so much fun.
Yeah, and you're actually getting out there talking to and working with teachers. What kind of feedback, I guess teachers and parents, what kind of feedback have you been getting since you've been on the road?
It's been really interesting when I talk to one of the big groups that I talk to a lot is is school counselors. And when I get to sit down with school counselors, they sort of tell me what they're seeing. And, I like to remain optimistic that, parents can learn to sort of back off a little bit, let the kids suffer a little bit from the consequences of their mistakes and learn from them. But school counselors are really, really concerned. They're so worried about what we're doing to kids in this sort of high stakes, super high anxiety culture. And they're not seeing that getting any better. They're seeing it getting worse. So it's really great to talk to them because they're that great sort of intermediary between teacher and parent and kid. And they really care so much for the kids that they advise.
And so why is this happening? We talk about letting our children fail. I've got 4 kids, and it's really hard for me to watch them fail, and
absolutely.
I grew up, I was a wrestler, growing up since I was 6 years old on the whole way through high school or whole way through college. And it's a sport where the failure is, you're out there by yourself and you fail. It's a brutal way to fail. It's a humiliating way to fail, to be honest. You're getting dominated by another boy. And so my parents had to watch me fail for many, many years. And ultimately that led to my success. And I talk about that in my TEDx talk. But what has changed? What's different? My desire to not see my children fail comes because I love them, right? I love them. I want to see them succeed. What was different, or was there anything different 50 or 100 years ago? Did they not love their children back then? Or were they just smarter than us and they knew the value of failure long before your book came out? What's changed?
Well, it's sort of the confluence of a bunch of different issues. Number one, we're having kids older. We're having fewer of them. We're having them after more education, after we've been sort of trained to, see grades and, performance reviews as the way we judge how good we are at the things we're doing. And then we have kids and we don't get that. I make a joke in the book that, for the first couple of years of my kid's life, I needed the pediatrician to tell me where they were in the growth curve because that was the only assessment I had of, how I'm doing as a mom. And, that can be so hard for us. So it's not that they didn't love their kids as much. It's just that we used to call it child rearing. And now we call it parenting. The focus of what this is all about has shifted from the child to the parent. It's become more about we're using our kids as an assessment of how we're doing as parents. And partially that comes from the fact that we're just as dependent as our kids are on those extrinsic motivators, which, is really, really killing off a lot of the enjoyment of just being a parent. And also it's setting our kids up to do exactly what we're doing, which is to, worship at the altar of, performance reviews and grades and scores and points and honors and trophies and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So what led you to write this book? I mean, was there a trigger? I mean, you're just for the listener, Jessica, by the way, is still a current practicing teacher right now. So you're a parent and you're a teacher. So you live in these worlds that you're talking about, writing about. But what was the impulse to write this book for you?
My total blindness to the fact that the very thing that I was angry at my students' parents for, this constant saving, I would be I taught middle school for a long time. And I would be sitting there talking to a student about how to come up with strategies for how not to forget homework and those kinds of things. And, the parent would, rush through the door with the homework, waving it in the air, saying, I did it, I brought it, here it is. And so as angry as I was getting at the parents for that, because as I was starting to understand by reading the research, that was really beginning to undermine my students' interest in learning of loving learning. Kids were just saying they didn't care about learning anymore. They were so preoccupied with the perfection and the scores and that kind of thing. As angry as I was from my view from my high horse was just so lovely. I realized that I was doing the exact same things to my kids. I have a now 18-year-old and 13-year-old. And at the time, my 13-year-old was 9 when I first had this realization. And I realized he couldn't tie his own shoes because I had been doing that for him because I didn't like seeing him so frustrated and upset and down on himself about the fact that he couldn't do it himself. So I had just kept doing it. And it wasn't just shoes. It was so many other things, talking to strangers, being able to do basic stuff. And I had to have one of those sort of, oh my gosh, I can't be mad at those people because I am one of those people. So that's where it all started for me. Figuring out how to back this up and turn it around with my own kids and help the parents of my students at the same time realize what kind of impact that was having on their children's ability to learn and to enjoy learning for the sake of learning itself.
That's interesting. Yeah. Enjoying learning for the sake of learning itself. And that's, if you hear any sort of professional development guru, Tony Robbins probably being the leading one, he'll tell you they say that self-growth is something we all need. We all need to be happy. You have to feel like you're growing. And I guess, for a kid, it's learning how to tie your shoes. That feels good. I know my 3 and 6-year-old daughters are young. They're at that age now. My 6-year-old is tying her shoe and she's excited to tell me she can tie her shoe by herself, and learn how to ride a bike without training wheels. We see these things, but we don't always practice them. So going back a little bit to what you said, the growth charts and sort of these metrics, is that some of the stimulus of our culture that is creating this? So we have so many metrics and sort of data-driven benchmarks that we're always trying to look to judge our child. And you see it not just in those benchmarks, I feel like, and I don't know, just kind of rambling now because there's so much out there. Like you see it in sports, I remember feeling when my kid, and this sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I'm going to put it out there. When my son was 4, there was a lot of his friends, you call them friends at that age. I don't know, just kids they, babble to. And I felt like a bunch of these other kids were starting sports. And I'm like, oh, I don't want Jesse to be behind. So we got to enroll him in T-ball, which is absolutely preposterous to me now to think that, does it start with the benchmarks? Is it the return, the metrics that we're looking at?
Well, that's when I talk about the fact that we have kids after more, education and after having worked for a while out there, we bring the tools that we use there back to our parenting. And it's really not uncommon for me to hear that parents keep spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, over, the milestones and the eating and the pooping and the, all that stuff. So it's sort of that. But what it is more than that, I think, is that, there's a fantastic book called, Pressured Parents, Anxious Kids by Wendy Grolnick. I love that book. And it's about the fact that we do this to each other. There's this thing that she calls pressured parents phenomenon. I wrote about it in an article in The Atlantic where I called the article, Why Back to School Night Made Me Feel Like a Bad Parent. Because I left my house feeling really great about what my kids were at home doing. My older son was practicing guitar. My younger kid was playing Minecraft. They had done their homework, whatever. I was feeling good about what my kids were up to. And I got to school and I realized, oh my gosh, some of these parents haven't even been home yet because they've been here doing tutoring. And some of these kids haven't been home yet because they've been at cello and they've been at, practicing their ski jumping and all the stuff that, I looked around and realized that my kids weren't doing and that my kids were somehow getting behind in this achievement game. And even me, I had been reading all the research. I knew about this. I thought I'd vaccinated myself against this feeling of panic that I'm not doing enough. I started to get a little freaked out and I had to step out of the room, which, as it turns out, is really one of the best ways to deal with this pressure. Is to step away from it. On the sidelines of the soccer tournament, sometimes it's just best to step away and take a breath and realize that, this is not a competition. Unfortunately, we tend to treat it that way. If my kid is doing all these amazing things, then I'm doing a good job as a parent. But if my kids are at home, playing Minecraft, then clearly I am asleep at the wheel and my kids are going to never, ever get into a good college and never have fulfilling lives.
Right.
We do it to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at other kids and we want to get our kids, engaged in, playing instruments and doing Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, sports, etc. Is that wrong? There's, I look back at my life and I there's so much value from the sports that I played, and I really got a tremendous amount of value, especially, I end up sort of really investing in wrestling sort of later, starting in middle school and certainly all through high school. It was more or less one sport for the most part. I did a couple other sports on the side, but for the most part, it was just wrestling, and I got a tremendous amount of value from that. And it was like just about year round, ton of time, ton of energy put into that. Is that the right thing?
Well, for you, clearly. I mean, and it's funny you mentioned wrestling. My niece right now wrestles. She's 10, and she wrestles in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and she's obsessed. She loves it. She loves it. Would spend all of her time doing it, and that's great. If I felt like my kid was becoming really obsessed with one thing and was unable to do anything else, then I clearly would start pushing them to have some new experiences. But no, if a kid is really loving something, then great. My problem is when we feel like we need to schedule our kids for all these things that we actually care more about than they do. I mean, the question I get quite often, and when I'm on the road is, my kid is now in high school and she's been playing soccer since she was 4, and we're so invested. We've been doing it for so many years, and she says she doesn't like it anymore and she wants to quit. But I just feel like we've put so much effort into this, and this is going to be her sport when she applies to college, and I'm not ready to let it go. And that makes me so sad, because I think about what kids who have time to explore. I mean, really, that's what childhood is supposed to be, is trying on lots of different things and seeing what works and what doesn't. And you were lucky enough to find your thing early. Some kids don't until later on. And sometimes it's, the thing that concerns me is if the kid is spending all their time doing things that are resume, items, as opposed to things they really love or things that they're just trying out, then when are they going to do that? Do you think that a kid is going to, have time then when he goes off to college to realize that he likes, metalworking or, whatever the thing is that, we don't give kids time to try out? That's what upsets me. That's what worries me.
So how if I'm listening, I'm going, okay, yeah, I see that somebody else is, these other people are doing that, but not me. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think we all kind of have that. I mean, I did this TEDx talk on why I teach my children to fail, but I struggle with it. I think some people go, oh yeah, Jim's some expert. His kids are just, they are so resilient. No, they can overcome any failure. Wrong. Like, I struggle with this. But I'm conscious of it, right? So I try to really be conscious and aware of it. How does the listener, they're a parent, they're a teacher, whatever, how do they become aware or evaluate themselves or figure out if they're doing this or where they're doing this in their life or their job?
Well, for me, it really comes down to thinking about my life. Am I spending a lot of time complaining about having to rush from place to place? The parents that come to me and say, this message is all well and good, but there's not enough, my kid's not getting enough sleep because there's not enough time to do everything. And I say, well, what is your kid doing? And then they sort of outline the athletic stuff and the music stuff and the, whatever those things are. And I say, well, but you're the parent. Sleep is the most important thing we can give our kids, not, the soccer or the piano lessons or whatever those things are. Sleep is a non-negotiable at our house. I mean, that's the one thing I will not let fall by the wayside. I just feel like it's too important to health. It's too important to mental health. It's too important to all kinds of things. So, listen to yourself. Do you hear yourself complaining to other people about feeling overwhelmed? Does your kid, look at your kid. Can you think of a time when your kid got so bored that they had to come up with, a cool new activity, game, whatever that thing is? Last night my kid was bored and he, made this cool box to put stuff in. Does your kid have time to do that? During the summer especially, do they have time to actually, get outside and just do nothing as opposed to get outside and do something that you've scheduled? So, I think it comes down to looking honestly at your life and saying, am I saying no enough? Is my kid having the opportunity to get bored, and am I feeling overwhelmed?
So when we're sitting there watching our child try to tie their shoes, or they fail at a sporting event, practice, or at school, what do we do? How do we grab a hold of ourselves and pull back? I mean, we have that when that feeling bubbles up inside, and I'm seeing my child struggle with tying her shoes. So I see my daughter struggle to tie her shoes. and I know she can do it, and I know she just needs to practice a few more times. How do I stop myself, or what are some techniques or strategies that I can use to allow them to fail more and to be more productive that way?
I think the first thing to do is to remind yourself that what we tend to do as parents is get really, really caught up in the moment, in the small emergencies, in the small, this homework has to be perfect. This, moment, I don't want my kid to be frustrated. If we could just take a little bit of a longer view and think more about, where do I want my kid to be in 6 months, a year, 6 years, 10 years? So when you sit down to sort of grab those shoelaces, stop and say, hold on. I'm reacting because this moment is uncomfortable, but in 6 months, it's going to be really important that my kid can tie her own shoes. So take that long-term view instead of the short-term view. The next thing that's really important is to value the process of learning over the end product. What's more important to you, that these loops are perfectly spaced, or that the process of learning can continue, that they get more opportunities? Every single time we stop in and rescue our kids, that's a learning opportunity lost. And we just don't have as many of them as we think we do. My kid, all of a sudden my kid's 18, and I know it's a cliche. I know it's trite to say this, but all of a sudden my kid is 18 and I have no idea where that happened. And this year has been a year of, oh my gosh, have I taught him all the things that I need to teach him before he goes out there in the big bad world? And I find myself racing, to teach him how to change a tire and jumpstart a car and all those stupid things that I've just never exposed him to because I thought I'd have plenty of time to do it. Stop thinking about the moment as being the most important thing, and think about where you want your kid to be over the long term, and realize that learning how to do those things can be more important than the end result of doing it perfectly.
And for the listener, I just want to point out that this is important for us too, as adults.
Oh, yeah.
When we, if we start a diet and, a week into it, we've not lost an ounce, maybe we put on a pound or something like that, or a month into it, you try to start a new business and your first step, you fail. This is part of the process. You talked about the process, focusing on that process and the long-term view, whether it's Warren Buffett or John Wooden, the Hall of Fame basketball coach from UCLA, or Michael Phelps. They talk about the process, right? The process is what's important, not so much the outcome. And I get really frustrated when I hear people talking about, it's only about the outcome. It's only about, the results you get. It's not about the result. It's about the process, because the process creates results. You can have the wrong process and get the right results once or twice or a few times or periodically. But when you get the process right, the long-term results take care of themselves. And go ahead. And think of this process not just as something, you're saying this is important for us too as adults. That's true. But let's flip it on its head. That process of us as adults trying things, putting ourselves out of our comfort zone, trying something, failing, that is so important for your kids to see. Yeah, sure. And we tend to completely forget about modeling. I was at a talk a while back and a woman asked me, she said, look, my kids do not like to read for pleasure. How do I get them to read for pleasure? And my first question is always, do they see you read for pleasure? And the answer to that question for her was no. So I don't understand how on earth we're supposed to get our kids to feel like going outside their comfort zone is a good thing to do. Talking about our mistakes and how to improve, embracing failures and learning from them, if they're not seeing us do that. So that's why there's a whole chapter in the book on goals and how important it is for us to teach our kid to have their own personal goals and not just, to do checklist items, and for them to see us have goals and try things that are a little bit hard. Having something on my goal list that's a little bit hard is one of the most important things I do to help my kid understand that it's important for him to, try things that are outside of his normal comfort area. Yeah, that is so fascinating to look at that way. We have to role model it. And the image that popped into my mind when you said that, Jessica, was a couple years ago, my wife knocked over like a big glass of milk onto the floor, and it spilled all over the table, all over the floor. And And she should be running this podcast, not me. She's a licensed therapist. She's like so good at this stuff, and I've learned so much from her. But when she knocked it over, she didn't get angry or frustrated. She reacted the way that she should have reacted. And this was very conscious on her part. And to role model that, just because, cry, the whole, obviously it's cliche to cry over spilt milk, but it was, she reacted in a way like, oh no, I need to go clean this up. This is not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. I knocked something over and spilt it and broke the glass. And it was the right type of reaction to model. And when you model that behavior, you model whether it's goal setting or struggling or how you overcome challenges. That makes so much sense. When you're doing this, your kids are going to look to you and do it, do it like mom and dad do.
Well, and I always say to parents, if we're trying to, keep the charade up that we're perfect, I have bad news for you because they're completely on to us. They know we're not perfect. Yeah. So why deprive them of those learning opportunities? It's so important to sit down at the dinner table and say, oh my gosh, I hit reply all instead of reply on this email today, and I really upset some people, and I need to figure out how I'm going to make that right. Yeah. And that's such an important learning experience for our kids to see how we handle it and to talk through it with them. And when we ask them their opinion on how they think we should deal with it, not only do we model for them, but they say, oh my gosh, my parents value my opinion. Yeah. It's an important conversation to have.
And for the listener, I urge you to take a listen to my episode with Jason McKenzie. And that is episode 85, jimharshawjr.com/85, or you can just scroll through iTunes and find it here. But Jason, he talks about that exact thing, about, being authentic. He tells the story about how he made a decision. It was the wrong decision. Sort of talked to his daughter's teacher without her knowing, kind of went behind her back, and it kind of blew up in his face. And he was just like, listen, I'm trying to be the best dad I can. I obviously made a mistake. I screwed up. Let's talk about how I should handle something like this in the future. And it was just genuine and authentic. And, I get so much value out of doing these interviews and doing these podcasts because I hear so many repetitive things coming from successful people and great people with great messages. And this is just another message. We're hearing the same thing in a different way, being genuine, being authentic, admitting our mistakes, and being real about our own failures and how that helps us as parents, as teachers, et cetera.
I think the most important thing, there's a lot of this sort of rah failure, learn from failure. It's all great. But I don't think a lot of people really understand the implications from a learning perspective. And I think drawing that line between the two, between overparenting and rescuing your kids too much and how they learn it tends to kind of surprise parents. And, the short version of the story is that, kids who are parented by overbearing parents that are what we call directive or controlling, those kids don't have to sort of come up with the emotional wherewithal, learn the emotional wherewithal to persist when they get frustrated, because there's always someone there to tell them what the next step should be. Yeah. But the children of what we call autonomy supportive parents who support kids' autonomy, are more able, and the research shows, to persist and to finish tasks even when those tasks get frustrating. And the reason that that's so important is that there's this learning tool called desirable difficulties. And it's been around for a while, but there's a great book that came out a few years ago called Make It Stick from Harvard University Press, where they talk very specifically about why this works. Desirable difficulties are one of the most important tools that teachers have. And desirable difficulties are essentially just something that's a little bit harder than your normal comfort area, something you have to manipulate a little bit with your mind, something you have to work harder to understand. It turns out when we engage desirable difficulties, we automatically help students move information from short-term memory to long-term memory. We help them encode that information. So if you have a kid who can't be frustrated, a kid who, collapses and gives up and, is helpless the moment that they get frustrated, I, as a teacher, can't use desirable difficulties with that child. So that child is automatically starting off with a handicap in my classroom. And so in essence, what I'm telling parents is all those things that you're doing to make your kids' life easier and not have them be frustrated and you think have them feel better about themselves is actually handicapping them in the long run when it comes to learning. And those kids also end up with this thing called learned helplessness. And because it turns out that our default mode when exposed to long-term hardship or frustration is to give up and curl up in a ball and say, I can't do it, and to go helpless. But just recently, Martin Seligman at University of Pennsylvania, so the father of positive psychology, published a paper showing that the default mode in our brain is this, helplessness state. But the one way that we can sort of get past that learned helplessness state is through control, by being given some control, some autonomy over a task. So the more control we can give our kids, the more we can help our kids learn to be comfortable with frustration, comfortable with something that's a little harder than they can handle, the better that kid will be at learning. So it's so important for so many reasons for our kids to be a little bit more comfortable with frustration.
I'm sold. And I think the listener is too. So what next for us? You talk about in the blueprint, the book is kind of like this blueprint for handling, just reading on the book here, handling homework, report cards, social dynamics, and sports. What are, can you share some of those solutions maybe that you provide in the book or sort of action items that we can take in the next, let's say, 24 to 48 hours with something that we'll experience as parents?
Absolutely. So, the first thing is, number one, to be on the same page with your spouse, your partner, your whoever is co-parenting with you, because you're not going to get very far with your kid and I hear this a lot, one parent is the overparenter and one is not, and it creates tension. So being on the same page with your partner is really, really important.
So having that conversation with them.
Having that conversation. Yeah. And that can be a hard conversation to have, but after that, then talk to your kid. Pulling the rug out from underneath a kid without explaining why is a nightmare. And I'm a big fan of full disclosure with kids, being a little more honest with kids about what we're doing and why. Mainly because it helps them see that we respect them as human beings and as the adults they will become, and say, look, I think I've been doing too much for you. And we're going to start with homework. So let's say around homework, that's now your job. The expectation is you will get your homework done. You'll do it to the best of your ability. It will make it into your backpack and it'll get handed in to whatever teacher needs it. So that's your job. I'm going to back off now. And here are my really clear expectations that you'll do it to the best of your ability, all that. And here are the really clear consequences about what's going to happen if you don't hold up your end of the bargain. And in the book, I'm really clear about the fact that some consequences we tend to use with kids just are silly, like taking away electronic devices in exchange for the homework thing. It's silly. Kids with not great executive function can't connect those two things.
Sure.
But, for example, in our house, if you don't hand homework in and it's going on for a while, then you have to run the parent-teacher conference with the teacher so that we can come up with solutions. And as a teacher, that's always my suggestion. I would much rather hear that a kid is coming to me and looking for solutions rather than the kid has been grounded for a month.
And that's a very relevant, they can make that connection. Okay, I didn't do this and therefore I must do that. And that is part of the solution. So not like I didn't do my homework, therefore I don't get electronics time, because they're really not related.
Kids are not very good at drawing connections between two completely unrelated things and being grounded or having their electronics taken away. Those homework and electronics it's hard to hold those two things in their head at one time.
Sure.
But if the natural consequence of not doing your homework is that you get you get in trouble with your teacher and you get in trouble with your parents, well, bringing those two people together to talk about solutions, that's a natural consequence that flows. Okay. So really clear expectations, really clear consequences, and then step back and actually let your kid, feel a little bit of heat. And the one really important thing that I like to stress is that if you're going to step back around homework, or you're going to step back and not look at that parent portal on the grading software anymore at school, talk to the teachers and say, look, I've been doing a little too much and it's time for me to step back and be more of a partner in my kids' education with you. So if something's starting to go wrong, I need for you to talk to me, email me, because I won't be checking the parent portal. I need for you to let me know because my kid is going to be taking more responsibility. And if I know most teachers, which I think I do, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been a teacher for a long, long time. we as teachers are going to so appreciate you giving us a vote of confidence in our ability to hold your kid to consequences and to teach them. So expectations, consequences, talk to the kid's teacher, the kid's school, let them know that you're backing off, and then really do back off and be consistent.
Now, what if you are, and those are very concrete steps. So thank you. And for the listener, I will have these in the action plan, jimharshawjr.com/action. And I'm going to have everything she just spelled out. I'm going to have that all documented on a PDF for you. What if I have grown children, or what if I am a manager of sort of people in a younger generation? You know, they're coming out of college and maybe they have this, you know, they're not resilient. And is it too late, or are there things that we can do for
No.
you know, older folk, you know, older adults or older young people?
Well, it's funny. The exact same thing that works with really little kids actually works for older kids and adults as well. You know, when your kid comes to you with that painting and says, "What do you think? You like my painting, mommy?" Or whatever daddy. And your best response should not be, "Oh my gosh, you are so talented. It is so beautiful. It's so perfect." Your best response should be, "Well, what do you think?"
Yeah.
Giving kids an internal locus of control and an internal locus of whether, you know, understanding whether or not they've put in a good effort, put in their best work, that kind of thing. And that works with adults too. I mean, if you turn things around and someone comes to you and says, here's that report you wanted, and you hand the report back to them and you say, you know, are you happy with this? What did you do to get there? Putting all of the stress back on the process over the product is really, really important, especially for perfectionist kids.
Yeah.
Kids who are perfectionists, you really, really have to take the emphasis off of the product and back onto the process of getting there. So when you have someone who comes to you with, a piece of work that's substandard, your best thing you can do is to hand it back to them and say, you know, what do you look at this? Do you see anything wrong with this? Is there anything you could have done better here? Because inevitably, they're either glossing over it and need an education in how to spot those things, or they really need that feedback to see it for themselves. Because if you're telling them that what's wrong with it, then they can blame you for being over picky, or they can blame you for being, you know, a jerk. But if they're looking at their own work and saying, "Oh yeah, look at that. I didn't, you know, capitalize the proper nouns in this work report," that's going to be a lot more important for them to be able to spot, because next time around they'll be able to see it rather than rely on you to tell them what they did wrong.
Yeah, that's interesting. I read an article called Productive Failure, or it was about productive failure. And it was so fascinating because it talked about how when you give a child a task, and then and you don't teach them about it first. You give them a task, they struggle through it, and then you teach them, and then afterwards you go, okay, here's how this is done, and then you teach them. Versus doing the opposite, which is what we always do, is here's how you do it, now go do it, and they have to try to memorize how to do it and then go do it. They actually learn more by doing it the productive failure method. They struggle with something. You give them a task, they struggle with it, and then you teach them how to do it, and then now it sinks in better for, you know, that's just how learning occurs better, and that's exactly what you're talking about.
I love the word adapt for this, and that's not my word. It's a word that gets used a lot, but Tim Harford has a fantastic book called Adapt, and it really comes down to, it's actually not the failures that are the important thing. That, you know, gift of failure it's my title of my book, but the failure is actually not what's most important. It is the way we react to failures, the way we adapt to failures, that is essential. And when parents say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you say you want my kid to fail," I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I want your kid to have the opportunities to learn from their mistakes. And when we're taking those opportunities away from our kids, we are doing them a huge disservice and denying them incredible opportunities for learning.
This all sounds so intuitive, but we don't do it. It all makes so much sense, but we don't do it. And I want the listener to realize, like Jessica talked about, several times she said it, just you have to step back and look at this from a different perspective. You have to step back and remove yourself from the situation. And that goes back to what nearly every one of my guests have talked about at some level, is this form of hitting the pause button on life to evaluate, whether it's parenting or trying something we're trying to succeed with at work or any area of our life. It's hitting that pause button and really asking the right questions of ourselves and of
well,
the
and
people
that's what happened to me when I was so pissed off at the parents of my parents of my students, and then all of a sudden had this aha moment where I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing the exact same thing. And my husband and I both had to sort of put our foot on the brake and say, how do we fix this? We have taken our kids down a path that we're not happy with and we're not proud of. How do we turn that around so that we can create more competent and autonomous kids? It was a really important moment, I think, not only for our parenting, but for our marriage.
Yeah, I believe that. So Jessica, you have this book, you've written this New York Times best-selling book, which is every author's dream, right? New York Times best-selling book. And now you're this highly sought after speaker and you're traveling all around the country and you're in high demand. You are successful, right? You are from our perspective looking at you are just extremely successful. Can you tell us about a time maybe where you failed, where you experienced defeat in some area of your life, but how you were able to overcome that and either overcome it or leverage it for success down the road?
This book is a perfect example of it, actually. So this was my first book. I've been a journalist for a while, so I'm used to writing in, shorter chunks. And I got my dream editor. There was an 11 publisher auction for this book. It was crazy. And I got my dream editor, and a great agent, great editor. And I worked on the book and I worked so hard and I handed it in and, my editor told me that the book was unpublishable in its current form. Wow. And not only that, she used the words ghostwriter. Now, as a writer, the word ghostwriter made me want to throw up in her office. I literally thought I was going to pass out. And, I said, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry.
She's basically telling you that this is terrible and somebody else needs to write this for you.
She's telling me that I'm going to need help writing my own book. And wow. I said, look, and then she sort of stopped and she saw how upset I was. And she said, look, I'm not saying that you need someone to help you write this book. What I'm saying is you need someone to help organize this book. And I said, okay. You tell me everything that's wrong with my book. I mean, all of it. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to write it all down. And then will you give me 3 chapters? Let me have 3, actually it was 2 chapters to get it right, to show you that I can do better. And I had to sit there for an hour and listen to her tell me everything that I'd done wrong. And a lot of it was really, really hard to hear because it's things that, I, as a writer, had prided myself on up until this point. So I went home with this jam-packed notebook and I spent a couple of weeks working on those 2 chapters, and being pretty merciless and on myself and really hard on myself to try to improve. And those 2 chapters she loved, and those 2 wow. chapters became the rest of the book. And I didn't end up needing any help except for obviously that incredible help from my editor, to do this book. And then it ended up, it's gotten lots of great acclaim and it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for a long time. And there are 2 ways I could have handled that. I could have curled up in a ball and said, yeah, let's have someone else do it because clearly I can't do it. Which has been, by the way, my response to other things in the past when I had sort of more of a fixed, intractable mindset about my own need to be perfect. But I didn't. I consider this to be this book to be my journey through this incredible failure, this incredible lack of, all these skills I needed to create this book. And the only way I was going to get them was by facing that, adapting and learning. So really this book in and of itself is my gift of failure.
Yeah, that's incredible. This is all, it's all very real for you, and you were able to translate that and give that to us as a gift. So it's absolutely incredible. My TEDx talk, which is kind of, it's gotten me a lot of attention, and that all mm-hmm. started from a failure as well. So it's mm-hmm. interesting how these amazing things really come from a failure, and we don't recognize that. We don't see that. Nobody sees Jessica as having failed. We just see this amazing book out there, and you're in high demand and New York Times bestseller. We don't see the struggle that went into that and the failure that went into that. So thank you for persisting for our benefit and for the world's benefit. Jessica, is there anything you have coming up, anything that you want to share? How can we find you, follow you, learn more from you? Like you said, you have sort of a lot of community readings of your book going on. And if I'm a teacher listening or a coach listening or an educator, I have a lot of teachers and coaches and educators that listen to this show. How do we find you and how can we benefit from you?
Well, everything is at jessicalahey.com, including my speaking schedule. And on there, I note whether it's a private thing or a public thing, and if it's a community read. And if it's a community read, there's always going to be books for sale, and I sign them at the event and all that kind of stuff. And then I also do some professional learning or professional development conferences like Learning in the Brain I'm doing this spring. So you can always find that speaking stuff there. And then my former editor at the New York Times, KJ Dell'Antonia, she and I have a podcast about writing, about trying to make a living as writers and the realities of that. Everything from pitching to editing to, procrastinating, all of that stuff that we do as writers and how to be better writers. So you can find all that stuff at jessicalahey.com, including the show notes for the podcast and the links to the podcast and all that good stuff.
Excellent. Those are great resources. And for the listener, I will have a list of everything she just referenced there, as well as her social media links in the action plan, jimharshawjr.com/action. Jessica, thanks so much for making time to come on the show.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
And for the listener, until next time, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.